Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 6. This is I'll Grieve You With This, the podcast that you just clicked on. And I'm your host, Micah Walsh. I'm very excited to present today's episode. I had a nice conversation with Elvis Weinstein about his long and storied comedy career and his perspectives on loss and a number of other things. And I really enjoyed myself. I appreciate Josh for sharing his stories. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Without further ado, this is episode 6. I'll Grieve You With This with Elvis Weinstein. Thanks, man. Hey, nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Yeah, I'm happy to have you on here. So, Elvis Weinstein, you're my guest today.
It is Stein, by the way.
Oh wow, shit! I'll edit that out. Right.
No problem.
Damn, I think that's the earliest faux pas I've committed on this one. So sorry about that.
Well, it's a commonly committed one. So.
Sure.
I'm the outlier with my pronunciation.
There, it does seem to be that way, but I could have done at least a little more research. Elvis Weinstein. Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. So this is my podcast about grief and humor and how the two are intertwined. An earlier guest of mine, Patrick Bauer, was nice enough to put me in touch with you.
I love Patrick.
He's a great guy. I had a really.
I'm old. Time. I'm old enough now. I can go. I was very good friends with his parents.
Yeah, I learned more about them than I've ever known. But yeah, you've been doing comedy for a real long time. So just a quick intro, just for if my listeners are unaware of your resume.
They are.
Well, they're probably familiar with some of your work, maybe. If not. So yeah, you're a very prolific comedy writer and performer, co-creator of Mystery Science Theater 3000. I believe you wrote and produced for Freaks and Geeks and a number of other shows.
Correct.
And today, in my cursory bit of research, I learned that you've been doing stand-up since the age of 15.
Correct. And I am now the age of 50.
Yeah, that's an impressive amount of time to be doing stand-up.
And to not get anywhere is the really impressive.
Oh, you've got it. So come on. But that is funny. I watched sets of yours on YouTube that were 29 years apart. So yes. I saw you in 92, and then I saw you much more recently. Yeah. So if for lack of a better jump off point, since I don't really do pre-interviews, so we don't necessarily know each other's story, would you mind sharing with me maybe your earliest memories of loss, and additionally, and this is probably just a separate question, what inspired you to get into comedy at such a young age?
Well, I mean, I guess the two are probably tied in some way, but I always felt a connection with stand-up as a kid, and it was clear that I grew up in a very funny house.
Okay.
With like a pretty high bar for funny too. We had a house where everything was always funny as well as serious at the same time.
Okay.
House, so there was always a funny joke for whatever situation. And you could change the mood with that joke. If you did a bad joke, you could exasperate the situation.
Wow. Like bombing in front of your family.
Absolutely.
In a that's more intimate than bombing on stage, I would imagine.
Like my mom was easy to flip. If she was pissed off and you got the right joke in, the whole problem was over.
That's such a great disarmament tool.
But you could escalate with the wrong joke. So,
Tell me about your parents' sense of humor. Are they still around?
They are not. They are definitely part of my lost profile.
Ah, yes.
But my dad was a lawyer. My mom was in advertising. They both were Minneapolis Jews. And they were just incredibly smart, magnetic, funny, really well-loved people, and they were also, my mom especially was, had no edit function. So she just,
I love that.
so you knew exactly what she was thinking at all times, and she had no
Sure.
boundaries. If someone had a problem, she was like right in there with suggestions. No matter who it was, she was just there to help.
Sure.
Um, and she worried about everything possible that could go wrong. She was a great worst case
Sounds like
scenario
my mother.
stylist.
Yes.
And it wasn't like she wasn't my brother called her a cheerful pessimist, and I think that's probably right. She expected things to go wrong. She would admit it if they weren't. She wasn't someone who thought things were going wrong at all times, but she wanted to be prepared for any eventuality.
Okay.
And my father was sort of the opposite. My father was very calm, very very much will handle it if it happens, and so I fell somewhere in the spectrum between the two. So I have a voice that scans for trouble, and I have another voice that says we'll handle it if it happens.
Of course.
um and so like I said, they my mom had no edit function, and so my parents just played this very open hand about what being a grown-up was, I think. And so my brother and I were very mature, very young.
Sure.
They treated us like adults from a very young age.
I would say
And
it seems like you found your comedic voice very young. I mean, you were very confident in the videos I watch.
Yeah, I felt like, I didn't quite know the how to write material. I mean, I knew how to write a joke from the get, I think.
Sure.
Just
Yeah, you
because
definitely have the beats like
yeah,
down.
yeah,
And
I had honed that within my house, I think, just the rhythm.
sure.
The problem when you're 15 is you have nothing to talk about,
Right.
so I did a lot of TV commercial jokes out of, and a lot of very, it was, which was fitting for the 80s. It was a very
It was hey,
very observational time.
it was very observational what I watched, but you were killing it, man. People loved it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And it was in Minneapolis at a time when there was just, the first weird thing was that people accepted me as a peer very quickly. So
Yeah.
that it
That's
wasn't like
huge.
I wasn't a kid hanging around. I was another comic, because I brought it. I brought material. I gave other people material. I was,
Yeah. You
in
seemed
fact,
very prepared.
we talked about Patrick Bauer, and his father used, when I was like 18, his father used to take me out on the road as his feature, because I'd write him, 10 new tags a week.
Wow. Yeah.
And I did that with a lot of headliners.
Did he buy these from you, or was it just
No, he would just give me the work,
that's good.
and
Yeah.
he said, I saw him shortly before he died, and I don't know if you're familiar with Wild Bill Bauer, but
we interacted barely. I started comedy a couple years before he died in Minneapolis.
yeah,
But I never got to actually have a conversation in any
I saw him
meaningful way.
shortly before he died, and he says, Josh, I always took a Josh Weinstein out on the road with me, but you were the best.
Nice. Yeah, he cast a big shadow from what I hear.
He did
in
indeed. And
yeah.
he was a huge help to me in getting in with all these bookers out on the
Sure.
road as an 18-year-old, or 17-year-old.
Yeah. P-Bow mentioned that Tom Arnold hooked up his father with a couple of writing gigs. Were you in Minneapolis during the Tom Arnold days?
I was there sort of right as he had transitioned to Roseanneville.
Okay.
So he would still kind of come back to town at that point, but I wasn't around when he was on stage in town regularly. But I opened for him in Roseanne when I was a kid.
Nice. Yeah, you really established yourself right out of the gate, huh?
Yeah, it was a weird time. Like I said, I the first thing was like people treated me like a peer, and then the second thing was there was just tons of stage time to be had, and
Yeah.
so between open stages and guest sets, for that first year or two, I was doing 5-6 sets a week, whether I was booked or not, so it was a great time to become a comic, and it was a city that was like so nice at the time, and so like, everyone was like just happy to be in the audience and be supportive, and it was just like, it was kind of a dream at the time, and then there was all these one-nighters that you could sort of, there was more gigs than comics almost for a moment there.
Wow.
And so
that sounds like
so it was easy to get work
a nice era.
Yeah, if you had half an hour that would travel, you'd get work, you know. And
Sure.
that was true for me at 16, you know.
Yeah, that's incredible. Tell me about your first time on stage and how'd that go?
My first time on an actual comedy stage was at a place called the Ha Ha Club in Minneapolis, um, which later I think became like Comedy Sports or something. And then it was
Okay.
originally the Comedy Cabaret, which was one of the original um, clubs in town. In fact, Scott Hansen, who later opened the Comedy Gallery and became the Don of Twin Cities comedy for a long time,
Sure.
he was one of the original partners in the Comedy Cabaret. And it was this garage on 28th Street in uptown Minneapolis. And I was 15, and my best friend at the time, Barry Golob, he and I were big comedy nerds. And one night we were hanging out, and he goes, "I'm going to go do stand up tomorrow night. They have an open stage at the Ha Club, and I'm going to do it." Rather than being the supportive friend, I went, "Great, I'll come." You know, I was like, "I'll do it too."
Yeah.
And so like 2 hours before the show, I went to this pizza place and wrote 5 minutes, and did it and got enough laughs so that it, you know, the fish hook was firmly set.
You caught the bug
forever. Yeah. And then my buddy Barry ran the light that night big time.
Oh boy,
got in trouble. But
they cut his mic off.
They did eventually. But he, you know, he ingratiated himself, and he stayed around for like 6 months or a little more.
Okay.
And then, but I was, you know, I was there forever.
Yeah, it wasn't for him.
No, it wasn't really for him. No.
I respect people that dip their toes into comedy and then know that it's not what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, he was super supportive of me and still is. You know,
that's
and
great.
And he has this encyclopedic memory of my act from the time, so he can quote me jokes from 1988.
Sure.
Usually to burn me, but yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel when you rewatch? Like, I feel self-conscious when I watch sets of mine from like 7 years ago. I'm like, I can't believe I was doing that and my mannerisms. But you have 35 years of comedy history to look back on.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's like I forgive the kid more than I forgive the adult. You know?
Okay, sure.
You know, it's like the kid. It's like, I don't care how you're doing. That's pretty goddamn good that you're there. You know.
Yes.
But you know, there's years there. You know, once I moved to LA when I was 20, and then started writing TV full time at about 22. And so after that point, it was just like it was only through my own force of will that I've remained a comic. It's not like it hasn't been my living in many years, and it's not like there's a great demand for me to do it. So it's always been more about, I identify as a comic, you know, when I'm directing. If I'm directing a movie, I'm a comic directing a movie. When I'm writing a show, I'm a comic writing, you know.
It informs your worldview on everything, I would imagine.
It does. And I think less so now, but for years and years, I felt like at my heart, I'm a comic. My soul is that of a comic. And so if I'm going to think that way, I felt like I had to keep doing comedy.
Sure. You know? So did you try to make it a priority while you were, you know, doing these TV writing gigs to still try to get out and hit stages, or was there ever a period where you just,
there was a period where I would like go to Acme in Minneapolis once a year, and that was pretty much my stand-up career. You know, I'd write like 20 new minutes.
Yeah.
And for years I set up the show with a buddy of mine named Chris Bliss, just for this purpose, so that we do the show together on stage as two separate headliners.
Okay.
But the whole show is just he and I standing there. We'd just tag off doing 10-minute sets or so.
And the other remained on stage?
And the other remained on stage and would interject occasionally. And,
that's nice.
You know, but it was a way for me to like put out new material without having to have a solid 45 minutes.
Sure. It's almost like having a co-host.
Where
you're like, oh, great. Shit, that's my bit. Toss it back to you.
Yeah. So originally, you know, we did it for like 10 years. And then, you know, originally it was as a safety net for my own incapacity to do that a long set right out of the shoot. And then it developed into its own real show, you know, over time. But the inspiration for it was to cover my ass and still headline. So
that's nice to have a safety net in the form of a funny friend.
Yes, absolutely. And I knew his act so well at one point that we did a gig once, and he had laryngitis, and he would just whisper which bit of his to do in my ear, and I did his act. This is like in Monterey, California.
And he was on stage, just unable to speak.
Yeah, he just stood at the back of the
That's
stage.
amazing.
He'd whisper which bit to do because we had worked together so much for a while there.
Sure. What a funny dynamic. To be on stage and unable to tell your jokes but still get your point across.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have
That's
a
amazing.
Surrogate.
Yeah. Very nice. Tell me about how Mystery Science Theater came together, because that was pretty ahead of its time, I would say.
I think it was in its way. You know, it was also derivative too. You know, it feels like it was kind of like right in the, you know, where it should be now.
Sure.
Like, you know, now that I can see what came before it and what came after it, it made sense. You know, I like I said, I started stand up when I was 15, and a few months after I started doing stand up, Joel Hodgson, who created Mystery Science Theater, I would say I'm a co-founder rather than a co-creator. I would officially,
okay.
I would say.
Thanks for clarifying.
It's more for Joel's sake than mine.
Okay.
But Joel had this very big stand-up career in the early 80s. Okay. As a prop comic, and he was like one of the biggest comics for a moment, and he was on Letterman about 5 times, and he was on Saturday Night Live about 5 times.
Oh wow.
And you know, and he moved to LA and got all these sitcom offers, and it just kind of freaked him out. He was this Christian kid from Minneapolis who was like 22 years old, and like more of a magician soul than a comic soul at that point. And he was this prop act, and it was a great act. He invented these props, and it was like smart Carrot Top, essentially. You know?
Okay, nice.
And it hit big, and he was like the hot kid out of Minneapolis, you know, right around the same time as Louis Anderson.
Sure.
But Joel came out to LA, and he got like an offer for a bad sitcom, and he didn't want to do it. And then they like doubled the offer, and he was like, I still don't want to do it. I want to go back to Minneapolis and be a bohemian. And that's basically what he did. He quit for like 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
So when I started doing comedy in 1987, this is all a long story to say, Joel decided to come back to stand up.
Okay. So he was returning from his little
sabbatical
time. Yeah. A little exile.
Where he was like repairing GoBot costumes for Tonka toys and stuff. He was,
oh wow!
And making robots, which led to the.
Of course, that would lend itself to the mechanics of the Mystery Science Theater set.
Yes. So he, like a few months into my stand-up foray, he decided to teach this class on sort of creativity and stand-up. And me and my friend Barry were huge fans of his because, like I said, we were stand-up nerds. And we watched Letterman and Saturday Night Live.
Of course, and he was the guy.
He was the guy from Minneapolis. So he came back, decided to teach this class, and we were like, absolutely, we're in 100%. So we started going to this once-a-week class with him. And at the end of that class, we did like a month-long show at the Ha Ha Club where we were his opening act. Members, some of the people from the class were the opening act for his big show. So during all that time, suffice to say, Joel and I became friends. And then we were a couple of years later, like all the a group of comics in Minneapolis had formed this writing group that met once a week, where we'd all just sort of dump our notebooks on each other.
Okay.
And, you know, see if anyone had anything for each other. And Joel started coming to that. And then one day after that, he came up to Trace Beaulieu and I and said, hey, I'm doing this thing at this UHF station with puppets and things. Do you want to come do it with me? And we were like, sure. So the next day, it was basically, I'm going to watch movies with puppets. I know nothing else besides that, really, you know. And so I chose one puppet, and Trace chose another. And initially, Joel's idea was that it was going to be like those Saturday afternoon hosted movies you'd used to see on local TV.
Sure.
But to be a good host, he'd actually go into the theater and watch the movie with the people. As opposed to the other way, where it was just like cutaways, you know.
Yeah.
At the commercial break. And so, you know, his thought was he'd, you know, make some comments, maybe a trivia point about the movie, but, you know, and then because it was all improv, you know, each week we'd make more jokes, you know, and
I would imagine that would be addicting too, because
it was addicting, and you noticed once you started making them, you started to notice the absence of them when you went a while without
yes,
it,
yes. And
so
you guys, some of those are so joke heavy that I am laughing at one thing and the next joke is already past me because
absolutely. And when we did it live as Cinematic Titanic years later, it's like that's a whole part of the art, is knowing which jokes not to do because you're stepping on a laugh, or
sure,
the laugh is stepping on the setup, to this next punchline.
Yes.
So when you do it in a studio, that's not a consideration really, but once you start to feel the laughs, there's way fewer jokes in one of these episodes.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have like a lighter touch on something.
But there's hundreds. Regardless, there's hundreds. There's like up
yes.
to like 800 jokes in a 2-hour show or something.
Yeah, it's densely packed.
It is. And that allows you to do jokes that, are applicable to 2 people.
Yes, yeah, I do like when it's someone I was like, wow, that is a deep reference. And like
but that's what I think that's what made the connection for people to the show, is that when you're the person who gets that deep reference, you've made a friend for life.
Yes, you're like, holy shit, did they really mention that thing?
Right.
I didn't know other people knew about that.
Right. I thought I was the only one who remembered that.
Yeah, that's I really enjoyed Mystery Science Theater 3000. I had an opportunity to tour the set in the 90s, probably much after you were gone, but it was nice. I got to see your original puppets, or Gypsy and Tom Servo and Crow, and
I'm the only person to have played all 3 puppets.
Oh wow, I didn't know you were you Crow as well then?
I was Gypsy and Servo originally, and then there was a couple of weeks where Trace went on vacation during the KTMA show, and I did some Crow voicing as well.
Wow, the whole cast.
That's right.
That's impressive.
And so, and now I'll circle back even farther and go, this is also probably the story of my first true loss. Was leaving the show. There became a lot of acrimony between me and particularly Jim Mallon.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Because you were so young.
Yeah, and that was really the focus of it, is once they decided to make it a business, they couldn't fathom making an 18-year-old a partner with them. And so instead of dealing with that, they just became shitheads to me and tried to alienate me, and like, treat me like an intern, except I'm co-starring on the show and on screen every minute
and voicing literally every character at some points.
Yeah. So I was resentful about that, and they were paying me less than everybody, and I didn't get a piece of the company. And
that's gotta sting to be. I know you distinguish you were not the co-creator necessarily, but that was something you poured yourself into, and then to walk away from that, and
others did get a piece.
And to walk away from that had to have felt pretty conflicting, because it was a great comedic thing that you guys did. So
and clearly, obviously I had some part in it. It's harder to sort out, 35 years later what it was. It's like I've raised a kid now. I understand that much certainty coming from a teenager, whether it's correct or not, is fucking annoying, and so I'm sure I became arrogant along with everybody else, and it was even less attractive on this kid, I think.
You made the choice to walk away, or
it was I would say it was mutual. Like it was clear it wasn't going to happen further, and I was sort of dragging my feet on how I was going to leave, and they were like, I think it's time for us to split. So I would say I was fired, really, but there wasn't going to be a continuation regardless. It was really more just Minnesotans going, how do we have this conflict?
Right. Let's indirectly
so I felt hugely rejected,
of course,
and
luckily were you resentful of the continuation of the program, or
no, not really,
and I noticed that you did collaborate with them again when they came back to Netflix in recent years.
Yeah, and we did Cinematic Titanic, which was like a 5 or 6 year live and DVD show that we did, and
Right.
No, I mean, we've had these, we've all made peace over the years. Joel and I really had the bit. I mean, Jim Mallon and I never made peace, but everyone else,
he was the producer or what?
He was a producer, and he was essentially the person that alienated everyone away from the show who loved the show.
Did other people? Did he ultimately
he ended up
stay with the show?
He stayed with it through the end, and then he owned it basically.
Oh wow!
And then Joel, within the last several years, bought him out, along with Shout Factory, and so
wow. Yeah, I could see how some of the fun of comedy would be sucked out in a situation like that.
It was really unfun, and even if things had gone really well, it's not like I don't think I would have been there more than a few years, because I have a true allergy to routine, and
that's I'm a creature of habit, so
I am the opposite. Routine drives me into the ground.
Well, it's good. I mean, it seems like your career had a variety of different projects that were all pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's the through line to my career, is that it's always something different, and it's because for me, it's, if I'm not learning something, then it's routine.
If it's not fun for you, that's the time to change the channel, I think. Okay, so tell me about the fall, how you landed on your feet after this. What I would imagine would be a kind of devastating rejection.
Well, I mean, the fortunate thing was that I had the stand-up community, and even though I had douched up a little bit during this time, it wasn't irreparable. So
okay,
I think when we sold Mystery Science Theater, we felt pretty damn good about ourselves, and I think there was took on an arrogance and a separatism from the stand-up community, which I didn't really, but the others kind of did.
Okay,
because I was the only one who really, until Frank replaced me, Frank Conniff.
Yes,
and he was an ongoing stand-up too, but I was the only, I think Joel wanted to sort of get away from stand-up once Mystery Science started. Trace never had his heart in it to begin with, and so I went back to the stand-up community, and it was fine. It's, there was a few people who, who were my real friends, who were like, yeah, you kind of dicked up a little bit there, but we're glad
sort of your head became a little inflated, or what?
A little bit, yeah.
All right. Well, what I mean, you're a teenager, and you were putting yourself on the map. I think it's understandable.
And I was a new comic, which is like the most irritating species of life.
Yeah.
So,
you're like, I can do an hour. You lived doing comedy for 3 weeks.
Yes. So I went on the road, is what I did.
Sure.
And for about 2 straight years, I think I moved out. I left the show when I was 18 and moved out here when I was 20. And the year before I moved out here, I did literally 40 weeks. It felt like 40 years. Did 40 weeks on the road just to save up, mostly as a feature, some as a headliner.
That must have really whipped your act into shape, huh?
It did, except it was the wrong act. When I moved to, I had done so many shitty landlocked Midwestern clubs and
very geography specific references.
Yeah, and then I get out to LA, and it's like, why are you trying to do your fucking ice fishing bit at the Improv?
Right.
What are you doing? And so I really had to, it was a double realization. It was like wrong act for the wrong place.
Yeah.
But it was also like, everyone was going, you're a really good writer, which at the time I was going, that means I'm a shitty performer. I get it. Okay, I get it. But they really meant you're a good writer.
Yeah, I mean, your act was tight. It was really really punchy.
Yeah, I knew how to do that part, but I learned very quickly that my personality by LA Hollywood standards is not a breakthrough thing. It's not going to be I'm not a star, and I got that very quickly, and I was okay with it. Especially because I almost immediately started getting writing work, which was way more lucrative than my stand-up.
Yeah.
So by 22, I was, like at 23, I think by 23, I was the head writer of Later with Greg Kinnear on NBC. So
yeah, that's amazing.
I sound like such a douche. Going, and then I did this.
I really don't think you do. You sound like sometimes I interview other people like Patrick, who's like sort of embarrassed of being a comic. I'm like, dude, you're so funny. You need to revel in some of your successes, even if maybe they're not that distinguishable to you. I'm like, you're in any case.
Here's that Midwestern thing where
it really is.
Ambition is an ugly sin.
Yeah, it's like I apologize for existing as my default attitude. Yes. Yeah, speaking of the jokes not translating, I saw someone in New York a couple years ago, and he must have just moved, but he had all of his jokes were about the difference between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And I'm like, buddy, on the coast, they might as well be the same potato. They don't care about Pennsylvania and Kentucky are considered the Midwest to people out here. It's not like some stuff just doesn't translate.
Right.
And you find out immediately when you're like, oh, this was airtight in other parts of the country. And now I'm doubting everything I've ever written.
Yeah. That was kind of my initial experience in LA.
Well, it seems like you found your footing in all these writing gigs, and
I did. Yeah. No, I have no complaints. I'm a bitter free man, and I don't believe in showbiz justice. So that's all. Both have served me well.
Hey, yeah, good mantra to live by. Yeah. Do you want to tell me about how your parents passed?
I'm happy to. I mean, not happy, but I am both cancer. I'll start there.
I'm sorry to hear that. Were they long battles or short?
They were varied. My dad had melanoma.
Okay.
That they thought they had tackled at one point, and then it came back several years. They clearly hadn't gotten it all, and so it remanifested several years later. And he had a lot of, probably 3 years of going around the country for various treatments, and really, very little success.
Yeah.
In fighting it at the time, but things that now 20 some years later, they're just kind of making work that he was at the beginning.
Yeah. There's so much experimental stuff in that in the cancer genre. It's
so it was hard because I was living out here at the time. I was like 23, I guess. This is when I was at later with Greg Kinnear, when the rubber hit the road, at least.
Wow, so he was pretty young, I would imagine.
Yeah, he was about my age. He was 52.
Jeez, that's tough.
And my dad was a class act and a pretty internal guy in terms of his emotions, at least.
Sure.
He'd talk if you made him, but it wasn't like he was looking to.
And that's in regards to his illness, or just in regards to how he viewed life.
Just in general, he kept his own personal counsel pretty close, I would say. But he was counsel to many other people. Like many people came to him with their problems. He went to no one with his, I would say. I'm pretty similar in that regard.
That's that seems a little Midwestern also. But that's cool.
Midwestern.
That's cool that so many people came to him or confided.
Yeah, there was about 800 people at his funeral. And,
wow.
And just a long stream of stories of things that he had, pro bono work he had done for them, or he helped us adopt our kids and wouldn't take money, and
Yeah.
He was a really honorable man. And
it sounds like he was a great guy.
He was a special dude. Yeah, he was a really special guy, and to some extent that that made the loss easier, in the sense that he lived his life in the way that he wanted to and did it well, and despite the shortness of it, the story is still a good story.
Yeah, sounds like he used his time wisely.
He did, and he didn't give a shit about stuff that he was not ambitious or materialistic or money seeking, or the things that he valued were good food, good liquor, and like all that makes sense when he dies at 52. You go, way to go.
Yeah.
All your choices were to enjoy yourself more rather than
live it up and leave the party first.
Yeah. And so, and I was, he smoked his whole life, and I was really glad that the cancer had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, of course, because you don't have anyone being like,
yeah,
"Told you so."
yeah.
Like,
So I've because of these losses along the way, and I've lost comics, and I've lost really good friends, and I've lost both parents, and it's like I've really started to, I look at people's lives more as a book now, and it's like it's about the quality of the story rather than the thickness of the book.
sure, and also like, to keep that metaphor going, the last chapter does not define the story. You know what I mean?
No,
Especially if,
unless
well, just I know people that have
sometimes.
gone out in a very a way that it was not good, or
Me
like,
too.
but I go, I need to remember that is not my memory of them. They are not the person who died. They are the person
Right.
who did this and that and was there for me at this point.
I mean, but in the case of my parents, I look at them and go, no, the last chapter was the cherry on top for them because of their behavior during it all.
That's great. So do you think that your parents were able to accept or maybe come to terms with what was happening to them?
My father for sure was. I asked him,
That's great.
are you scared? He goes, I'm not scared, I'm mad.
Yeah, that's
which
a
was
very apt response.
right. And my mom was much more wrapped up in the unfairness of it with her own death.
Sure.
She was certainly wrapped up in the unfairness of my father's death.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think with my mom, it was she was determined to die well. She was determined to be to be a role model kind of person as she was dying.
Yeah.
Well,
that's brave.
It was brave and a little egotistical, but still,
right.
That's okay. That was my mom, and but she had like got wrapped up in this positive thinking course,
okay,
which was great for her for a while, and then as her cancer progressed, she was able to twist it so that she was blaming herself for not being positive enough, essentially.
That's unfortunate.
And I was like, that's a bunch of bullshit, Mom. That is,
yeah,
that this is now a weapon. The truth is you're dying.
And and the truth is cancer has no agenda. It just eats,
right. And I was just like, if right now this positive thinking is making you feel like a failure and your life has been anything but a failure.
Yeah.
And one of the things you taught me was to treat information real. And so the real information is we're not going to beat the cancer, but I'll be pissed if this last however long is spent with you feeling like you failed because you're dying from cancer.
Yeah.
And it was a hard conversation, and she thanked me for having it after, but it was really hard to go, no, you're dying.
Sure. Well, kudos to you for vocalizing that, because I know so many people who have lost parents or friends to cancer, and anger is very understandable, but a lot of people will just be like, I would rather talk about anything but what I'm going through physically right now.
Right.
Which I think is very understandable.
Yeah, like my parents, like I said, they played an open hand, so it was there was never there was not passive aggression in my house. There was aggression and aggression. There was a lot of directness in my family.
Okay. Watching some of your YouTube clips of stand-up, I thought it was very funny, but I was particularly impressed by your own chunk, the cancer chunk, where you discuss your brush with cancer. And I thought it was really, really poignant without being overly sentimental. And I thought it was super funny. Like, it was really, really good. Could you tell me about, and I'm sorry to introduce it like that, I don't even know if you want to talk about this.
No, of course. Put it on YouTube. It's the cancer chunk on YouTube.
Right, you're right. This isn't exactly private. You're right. Could you tell me about your initial response to the diagnosis, and at what point did you allow yourself to start writing jokes about it?
The jokes thing was there wasn't any allow. It was just that was just
Sure.
nah.
Sorry, maybe that was a poorly phrased.
Well, no, it's just there wasn't. You
didn't ask yourself permission to share.
I did the first version of that bit 3 weeks after my kidney was taken out.
Incredible.
And
at that point, did you know that you were now on the path towards better health? Or
I did, yeah. I mean,
okay.
The whole deal with was the treatment for this cancer is we're taking your kidney out.
Right. And you worked that into the bit beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So it was like immediate that you were on stage talking about it.
It really was, yeah. And I wanted to, some of it was this sort of, that was my way of beating it.
Yeah, of course. You get the last laugh.
Right. And part of it was, I've got something great to talk about. It's like
hugely compelling.
Hugely compelling. What you're looking for as a stand-up is ground that only you stand on, and fuck.
Yeah. It was definitely like, I wasn't like, well, this reminds me of someone else's act. And it was so from the heart, which is my favorite type of comedy. When you know someone's talking about something that's very real, and they're managing to make it accessible,
right?
And it's funny. That's everything I want in a bit.
And I think that's absolutely my goal in humor, but I also think that's an aspect of just Jewish humor. Is jokes in the darkest times is one of the defining characteristics of Jewish humor. So
yeah,
I'd love to take more credit for it, but I think there's a genetic predisposition
like
to applying comedy to the dark circumstance.
Sure. I like that Coen Brothers film, A Serious Man. That one is just full of punchlines without humor.
which is about my suburb that I grew up in.
St. Louis Park.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And in fact, the cantor singing in the movie was my cantor growing up in the synagogue.
Wow.
Like, he's literally the cantor who sang my mom's last rites.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah.
So, but that was a serious version of the kind of thinking we're talking about.
Yeah.
He was, that character didn't process it into comedy quite as quickly.
Right.
He processed it more into existential angst. But
yeah. But yeah, that is a very common characteristic, at least trope, of just like Jewish people being super funny and probably making light of having to go through a ton of shit throughout history.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like evolution gave them a sense of humor.
I absolutely believe it is a true survival mechanism of the Jewish genome.
Sure. What a unique characteristic to ascribe to an entire people. You're like, oh, these type of people are very athletic. These people have a really uniquely dark sense of humor. It's a strange sort of anthropology.
Some stereotypes are true. What can you do?
Yeah.
But I think that bit, that the cancer chunk on YouTube, you can go look at it.
And I would recommend that listeners do, because it's so goddamn funny.
Thank you. And I mean, it's my best bit. It is. Sure. It is absolutely. That's exactly what if I had a whole act of dark shit where I had if I had enough stories, it would be an act full of that shit.
Sure.
It's not like I want to manufacture or invent any, but I feel like that, again, like I said, that's the piece of ground I can stand on, is both having had it happen to me and my perspective on those things. My ability to be third person in very first person circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the stuff that comes from the heart are my favorite jokes to hear and my favorite jokes to tell, because it's like, I feel like I'm not even having to memorize it, because it's just my own story,
Right.
And then I'll do another set where I'm just doing one-liners. I'm like, I have to, trying to memorize the order of these completely random and orderless jokes. And then I do a big chunk. I have a big chunk that I've alluded to several times on this podcast, because I guess I have a limited number of anecdotes. But I have this really long chunk about spreading my father's ashes last summer, and we did it on like private property, and like the owners of the house like sort of came out, and then my mom was like, I used to live here, and then I got ashes all over myself. but it's my favorite joke to tell, and it's like so it just comes so naturally to me, as opposed to my my mundane observations about American pop culture. It's a different type of joke, and I value those as much too, but one of them is a lot more personal.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. I think that's another piece of human wiring, is that storytelling is kind of humans at our best. We're sharing something of ourselves and our commonality all at once.
It's really it unites the audience on something where you're like, I don't know your perspective at all with having to deal with that, but now I I at least chuckled at some of the the lighter aspects of that you were able to point out.
And as and I've directed 2 documentaries, and when you're doing documentaries, what I've realized about people is people really, really do want to tell their story.
Yes.
People are more honest to a camera than they are to a human.
Sure. That's the interesting observation, but it's totally true. And since I've started this podcast, I've had a couple people reach out to me who aren't comedians, and they're just like, I have a story to tell. And I'm like, that's cool. And I appreciate that this is making you, maybe want to get it off your chest. But also I'm like, some of this is like stuff that professional therapy could be a better outlet for. I'm like, I'm not actually qualified to help you with your grief. I'm just trying to get some punchlines and process my own grief at the same time. But I appreciate the people reaching out.
Story core.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, people do want to tell their stories, I think. So I appreciate you sharing with me, because you took a dice roll on this, maybe. Or maybe
the stakes weren't high for me.
Very little invested in this.
Patrick said, "Hey, my friend does this. Will you do it?" I said,
yeah.
Sure.
Well, thanks.
That was the stakes. That was the entire process.
All right. Well, I appreciate it nonetheless. So when you were no, I think I've exhausted about the cancer bit. I was kind of curious, did you write these while you were sick?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I wrote they were all real time.
But it was all maybe you were waiting until after the kidney was removed to discuss it on stage, or no?
It happened so fast that I didn't have the option of,
right, because your bit, you got diagnosed, and then the surgery was a week later.
Yeah, right? We had I got diagnosed like the day before Christmas of 2013.
Wow.
Which is okay. I'm a Jew.
Yeah, you're a Jew. That's what I was about to say.
And then I had to do a New Year's show in Philadelphia with Cinematic Titanic.
Okay. Do you remember what movie it was?
Our last, it was The Wasp Woman, because it was our last show ever as a group.
Okay.
And so that, and then my kidney was out like the 8th or the 13th, like the first week or 2 of January. So it was like 3 weeks from diagnosis to you're fine, but you have 1 kidney now.
Yeah.
And wow. I mean, I knew coming up to that, because as I talk about in the bit, like I had this colon issue a couple months before that. And that's how they discovered the kidney cancer. There weren't symptoms. They just, because they had to do a CAT scan on my colon, they noticed this growth on my kidney. Otherwise it would have killed me.
Yeah, my dad actually had almost a similar thing. His colon burst, and they went in and patched it up, and then they like took a little sample, and they're like, "Oh, you have the T-cell lymphoma." But it was like it was a happy accident in that they caught it, and similarly to yours, had they not, who knows how it could have. Right. We had as much, we had like time.
So I didn't freak out too much when the doctor told, I had prepared myself for it, because I had seen enough guys in that first round going, you should get this checked out when you get out of here for your colon. And then I went to one urologist, and he was like this old guy. He was like, plenty of things happen on kidneys that aren't anything, and come back in 6 months. And I went to my doctor and I said, I don't know. And he goes, well, let's send you to a better guy. And that better guy went, no, you have kidney cancer and we got to take your kidney. And it was basically almost in that speed that he told me the two things.
Wow.
So that I didn't have time to process, will I have chemo? Will I have, it was just like, here's the problem, here's the solution, that's what's happening. And I was like, all right.
Jeez, I can't imagine. But I guess it sounds like you were a little prepared for that.
Well, I was prepared, and I had been through all these other cancer battles with other people in life. So the word cancer wasn't it wasn't
the boogeyman.
It wasn't the boogeyman in the sense that I didn't just go cancer, death. I knew that there was all these different ways of having cancer.
Sure.
And I was very afraid of having my life become the cancer lifestyle, as I guess I call it, where it's chemo and checking up, and is it shrinking, is it growing, is that where your whole life becomes about the next test result.
It's like quarterly updates.
And so I was really grateful that wasn't going to be the course. There just isn't the treatments for kidney cancer very much. So
sure.
And I happened to have like the tiniest, the only reason they had to take my whole kidney was because of where the tumor was on the kidney. They couldn't take a big enough margin.
Okay, so they just had to remove the whole thing.
It was too near the blood supply to the kidney that they couldn't take a safe margin, so they had to take the whole thing.
Okay.
But otherwise it would have just been lop it off and walk, go on with your life.
Okay. Has that affected your day-to-day life now, or do you can't
not at all? It hasn't affected. The only thing I can't do is take Advil. I can't take none.
Seems like a reasonable
anti-inflammatories. Anything that's kidney damaging, and over the long term I don't do. But no, it hasn't affected my life at all, really, except for I got a good bit out of it.
That's great, man. I mean, it's not great. Excuse me. Let me rephrase that. I'm happy that happened to you. Well, first of all, it's great that it wasn't a many years thing, and also props to you for turning that around into such a funny bit in such a short amount of time.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're healthy, man. That's I'm glad it wasn't. And I'm sure, given your family history, it could have been maybe a more concerning, but I guess you didn't really even have time. They were just.
I didn't have time, and I knew it was a different cancer than both my parents, so I didn't have this like.
And it seems like you approach things from a reasonable-minded state.
I'm much more intellectual than emotional with information.
Okay, well, that can be a good thing.
That's my dad. That's my dad.
Okay, sure. Cool. I'm not sure what else more I want to explore with you. Are there any other griefs, landmarks in your history that you'd like to?
There's friends along the way.
Sure.
I had my buddy Barry Fox, who was a Minneapolis comic, who drove out to LA when I moved out here with me. He died of brain cancer, which was a tough one.
I'm sorry, man. Cancer's so unforgiving.
Bill Hicks was a buddy of mine.
Really?
Yeah. Which was
tell me more about that. Did you know that he had? I think he, as many people do, when they get a cancer diagnosis, I think they don't really reveal it. They don't make it public necessarily.
I did know, but I wasn't. We had become friends like 3 years before he died, maybe.
Okay.
We worked together in Minneapolis one week. I featured for him, and we became very fast friends. We hung out during the day, and I came up with the cover for one of his albums.
Really?
While he was there.
Which one?
Yeah, The Relentless, the one where he's standing in the snow with the mic stand.
Yeah, that's great, man. He was a big influence over my teenage years. When I first discovered him, I was like, oh shit, I didn't know you could do this. I didn't know you could have, I don't know, have like a message and be so funny in it.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe he liked me, because I was 19 or something. And
well, he started very young also, like, so
even younger than me. Yeah. And so, and then we stayed in touch on the phone, and then I moved to LA, and then he soon after that moved to LA for a little bit. And we saw, in fact, here's a good Bill Hicks story. I was on the road. In fact, I was on the road with Patrick Bauer's father, Wild Bill Bauer.
Nice.
And I was the feature, and there was an opening act. And the opening act after this, there had been something about bestiality that had come up that week as a running joke.
Sure.
And so, like a couple weeks later, this guy sends me this VHS mislabeled, but it was like all animal porn. It was like
Oh, wow.
this horrible bestiality tape. And so I put it in, and I'm like, what the fuck? And like 2 minutes later, the phone rings, and it's Bill Hicks. He goes, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm watching this animal porn, honestly. He's like, I'll be right over. And so within a half hour, he was at my house watching animal porn with me. And that was like, I think the last time I saw him.
Wow, what a cherished final moment to have.
And so we hadn't been friends long enough when he died, or when he was dying, for me to really be. He closed his circle pretty tight at that point. And he went on the road. He was in England a lot, just trying to make money for his parents to afford whatever happened to him, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't a long enough friend to be part of that inner circle, really. So I would send messages to him through people occasionally, but
Sure.
really the last couple of years, it was a spiritual friendship more than an actual one.
Yeah. I mean, some of my greatest friends, I go a year or two without talking to in any form.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Bill Hicks was your greatest friend by that definition.
No, and I just want to be clear to say that I'm not saying he was my greatest
friend. Yeah.
But it was
that's very cool. That
it was a special friendship that, it was a huge, as a person and a comic, it was a confidence booster that he liked me,
I can't even imagine like getting accolades from, well, he really didn't get the shine that he deserved in his life, but man, he was seemed like just a really
I think again, when it comes to the content of the book rather than the thickness of the book, it's like what he wanted was to be a fucking legend. And
sure.
He is.
And he's unequivocally
that is what he wanted to be, as a legend.
That is true. And I like that way of framing it, like the content of the book. It seemed like even though his life was cut short, he fully lived it.
Yeah, I mean, it is the perspective of, I can't say that for Bill. I don't know if I assume he felt cheated, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But as when you're dealing with the loss of somebody else, that's how I view, that is the way that that's the imagery that I now sort of use, is more about, I don't want to live in the tragedy of their loss. I want to live in the content of what came before it.
Well, that's the best way to celebrate their memory.
Yeah.
Is by remembering who they are, not what happened to them.
Yeah. Because what happened to them becomes about what happened to you then, a lot of the time.
Sure. And then it leads you to make podcasts like these where I'm like, oh, I lost this person, and I guess this is the direction of my narrative now.
Well, I mean, it's obvious, it's a big part of my narrative too, but it's not all in my narrative. It's not entirely negative. It's there's a more neutral. I have a more neutral stance towards death, which is that's what happened. Nothing to do about it. That's what happened. That's how the story went.
Yeah, that's I like that. It's sort of similar to like what you're saying about the Jewish sense of humor. It's like it is what it is. This is what life dealt me. Let's crack some jokes about it. Keep it moving.
And that was a central ethic of my father, was play the cards that you're dealt. He said that phrase a lot.
Yeah. It sounded like your parents had a big print on you.
They did, and I also believe, let me lay some more philosophy on it.
Please.
But I really believe, especially with parents, that the relationship does not end when they die. My relationship with both my parents has continued throughout my life since they both died, and I don't mean it in the most literal sense, but I mean it in a pretty literal sense, in that I knew them completely, and I knew their responses to almost anything in life by the time they died. I knew how they would react to things. I knew what they would, I didn't have to ask them, what do you think about this thing I'm doing? I knew the answer before asking them,
Sure.
And so I still can have that conversation with them, metaphorically, about in term, like I still seek my parents' approval.
Yeah.
My dad's been dead for half my life or more now.
Sure.
And I still want his approval, and I still feel like I can get it too.
You feel like you haven't got it though?
No, I do feel like I have it. He was
It's just a continuous journey.
He was generous enough to make me feel like he was proud of me.
That's
before
great.
he died.
It's really nice to meet comedians who have healthy relationships with their parents, because it's not the most frequent.
It's not. No.
No,
I'm not one of the approval seeking comics. I don't think. I'm more of the I want to be right. Like the joke is a theory, your laughter is proof that I'm right. And I also feel like it's a lot about Jen Kirkman was talking about this on her podcast, and ADD, which is it's kind of one of those few places where I operate as such an efficient machine is on stage.
Sure. Yeah. It's like you're in the zone.
Yeah. And I love that feeling.
Yeah, no, it's the best feeling ever. It's you get the bug, you got to do it.
Yeah.
Or if you don't feel the need to do it, people usually figure that out after a year or two.
And that's the only thing that whenever someone is talking about how they think they should be a comic, I'm like, well, that's not enough. you gotta need it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no why do it to yourself.
Right. Especially at some of these open mics, like there's a little bit of self-flagellation going on here when you're but yeah, it is an itch, and it's comedy's such a great outlet, so I'm glad there's so many forms of it, and it's such a uniter.
Yeah, there are very, very few things in this world right now that are searching for people's commonality rather than their differences.
Yeah, honestly, for real. Like at this point, hate is is up there as one of the top uniters. Yes. Unfortunately, but
yeah. Are you on team racist or team child molester? Which one are you on?
Don't make me choose. Yeah. Well, I think maybe I've exhausted my questions that I have for you.
All right. Well, that statement alone says you have.
Man, I really appreciate you sharing your time with me. This is it's good. I like to.
Good. I enjoyed it myself. Although all I did was talk about myself, so of course I did. So.
Yeah, douching it up, huh?
I feel like I should have asked a little more about you. I feel like. But
it's okay, man. I've shared enough of like I said, I'm repeating anecdotes, and
that's what I figured.
Episode 6.
You have an audience that knows the story. That's why I didn't want to be redundant.
Yeah, no. I like to explore my guests while keeping a little bit. I'll share a little bit about myself, but it's mostly like, hey, tell me your stuff.
Yeah,
and then I'll turn it into a commodity.
Do you like being in New York?
I really like it. Yeah, I love New York. Minneapolis is great. Which is where I did stand up for like 4 or 5 years, but yeah, it was time to be a smaller fish in a bigger pond, and it is what it is. I mean, I produced a show here, and like it's fun. Everyone and their mom moved here to do stand up, of course.
Right.
But I love New York. I'm very happy here.
Good.
At least as happy as my brain allows me to be.
Sure. There's a governor. There is a top.
I have to condition it. There's always an asterisk.
Sure.
Yeah. So are you back in Minnesota now?
No.
Or you're in LA? Oh yeah,
of
course.
LA, yeah.
We discussed the time difference.
I am going to Minneapolis next week, though, or 2 weeks.
You got any projects you are working on right now?
No, I got my podcast with Andy Kidler called Thought Spiral. I'm at the beginning, I'm pitching a couple of TV projects, and I'm at the beginning of another documentary development, but nothing, no real traction, anything at the moment.
You got a couple of pots on the stove.
Yeah, something will happen. So it's been 35 years. Something always happens.
Yeah, it seems like you're, like I said, prolific.
Or just like that, enough time. Enough thing, if you
just
do
time and
things,
inertia, is that what you credit to your success?
I mean, well, if you did something every 3 years over the course of 35 years, even that still ends up being a lot of shit. So.
It adds up.
So, I don't know if I'm never as prolific as I want to be. So
Well, I mean, that's what keeps you driving, right? That's why why you keep moving on.
Just want to make shit.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, Josh.
Nice meeting you.
Weinstein.
Correct.
Apologies for that. Oh, just right out of the gate. But it seems like you forgave me, so I appreciate.
There wasn't even forgiveness necessary.
Okay.
Just simply correction.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate you, man. And I appreciate you sharing your story with me. This was good for me.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Where can people follow you?
People can follow me at Twitter at Elvis Weinstein is my primary social media home.
Sure.
Or Thought Spiral podcast.
Yes. They should follow that. Cool. Thanks so much, man. Keep doing what you're doing, man. I really like your what your comedy is.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Take care.
You too.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
So that was episode 6. Thanks for listening. And a big thank you to Josh for sharing your story. If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to tell your friends, loved ones, coworkers, colleagues, enemies about it. Anything to get the word out, really. Follow us on Instagram at I'll Grieve You With This Podcast. Like and subscribe. Give us 5-star reviews. I don't know how the internet works, but I'm trying to get the numbers up. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week. Goodbye.